Welcome to Fix It Home Improvement, covering projects that every homeowner should know and great products for home and garden.
Hi, I'm JC, and this is where we share weekly home improvement tips. I'm here with my co-host, Cindy.
Hello, JC.
Hi, Cindy. This week we're going to talk about repairing a hole in a ceiling, and we'd like to thank Olivia Culver for liking and sharing the podcast. And I'm almost done reading through book 16. It's going to be a good one, and we'll let you know when you can download a copy on Amazon. Some of the first drywall-like sheets were developed in 1894 by the Sackett Plaster Company. They were 36 inches by 36 inches and a quarter-inch thick. The USG Company came out with their drywall sheets they called sheetrock in 1917, and the first sheets were a quarter-inch thick. They were designed to be covered with plaster, eliminating the need for lath between studs.
Super exciting, JC.
That's pretty interesting. So drywall sheets for walls are now commonly a half an inch thick, with ceiling drywall usually 5/8 inch thick, and that helps prevent sagging between the joists, especially for homes with joists 24 inches on center. Plus it reduces sound transmission and it's more fire resistant.
Cool.
This week we're going to be talking about repairing a large hole in the ceiling.
A large hole?
Yes.
How big?
So 2 inches or larger.
Did you just make that up?
So for small holes or indentations, it's very easy to repair with lightweight spackle. You can just...
Because it doesn't shrink.
Right.
And it won't fall out.
Right, exactly. But once you get an inch or so or 2 inches or larger, you need to use a patch or create a patch to cover the hole.
What is damaging the ceiling?
So from my experience, when I'm repairing ceilings, it's because of a roof leak or a plumbing leak. And now I've got to cut out the damaged area, so there's this hole that needs to be repaired.
Right.
If you have a hole because of a leak, you would fix the leak first, you'd let your drywall dry out, and then cut away the damaged area.
With what? A drywall saw?
Drywall saw or a sharp utility knife. Then you would prime any drywall that you're keeping if it's water stained. Cover it with a primer that blocks water stains. Kills and Zinsser have top-rated primers that block water stains. Kills is K-I-L-Z. Zinsser is Z-I-N-S-S-E-R. And you can get a small can and brush or roll it on, or you can get a spray can and spray the ceiling, which is convenient for small areas. You'd want to put down a drop cloth when you're working on any products for ceiling repair. A cloth drop cloth does the best job.
It's not going to be slippery.
Right, and you're not going to tear it up like a thin plastic drop cloth is really tough to work on.
Right.
If your hole is 2 inches or smaller in diameter, you can use drywall tape or a small drywall patch to cover the hole.
How wide is drywall tape?
So most tape is around 2 inches wide. So if you have a 2-inch hole, for example, I would cut a piece of drywall tape that's about an inch longer on each side of the hole. Put about 1/8 of an inch of all-purpose joint compound to embed the drywall tape into on each side of the hole, then press the tape into the joint compound.
Then what?
Then you would hold one end of the drywall tape with a finger or a compound knife, and with a 6-inch compound knife, start at the center of the tape and pull away from the side that you're holding. Use firm pressure. You want to remove excess joint compound from under the tape. You want to leave about a 1/16 of an inch of the compound underneath the tape. Then you would start from the middle of the tape and pull the drywall knife in the other direction. And if you don't pull too hard in the other direction, you shouldn't have to hold the other side of the tape.
Cool.
Use your compound knife to remove the excess compound off the ceiling and the tape. As you pull the knife over the tape, you can leave a very small amount over the center where the hole is. And you want this compound to extend a couple inches wider than the tape on each side. With premixed joint compound, you would let this first coat dry overnight. The next day you can lightly scrape over the compound with your compound knife to remove any particles. The first coat should be very smooth, but if you have any imperfections, you can use a damp sponge to smooth it out. You're going to then apply a second coat of all-purpose joint compound and cover the area a couple inches wider than your last coat.
Right.
A 10-inch compound knife is good for that second coat, and you want to fully cover the tape on the second coat. It's not going to sag now because it's held in place by that first coat. You're going to let the second coat dry overnight, then lightly scrape over the area with your knife to remove any particles. Lightly wet sand it with a damp sponge if you need to smooth any areas out. Then you're going to apply a third coat a couple inches wider than the second coat. You're going to let it dry overnight and then wet sand it to smooth the compound. The key to making a professional-looking repair with drywall tape or a patch is 3 thin coats of joint compound, each coat a couple inches wider than the last coat. The wider you extend each coat, the smoother it's going to look. Your eye won't be able to see the height difference between where the tape or the patch was and where it blends with the drywall.
Right. What about using fiberglass mesh tape?
So with that, one side has an adhesive, so you don't have to embed it into a coat of compound.
Right.
You would just cut it longer than your hole, push it onto the drywall, and then follow the same steps.
Right.
You can purchase a drywall patch at a home center or a hardware store. They come square or round in sizes like 4-inch by 4-inch, 6-inch by 6-inch, or 8 by 8. And they're usually a fiberglass mesh or a thin perforated aluminum with an adhesive backing. And the metal patches are great for larger holes on the ceiling. They lay flat, they're easy to cover with joint compound, and they're not going to sag from the weight of joint compound like some paper or fiberglass can.
Cool.
The fiberglass patches can be trimmed to size. You want the patch to be an inch or so larger than the hole, and trimming the patch in a circular shape can be easier to create a smooth first coat. You would start from the center and pull towards the outside on one side of the patch, and then start from the center and pull the other direction. And with light pressure, you can create a very smooth transition from the patch to the drywall. You can also get a kit that has a few patches, a plastic compound knife and compound. Some come with sandpaper, but it's not easy to use the small plastic knives. It's hard to feather out the compound for a smooth repair.
What if you have small hands?
Well, they're easy to hold, but you want that width. You want a 6-inch knife and a 10 or 12-inch knife, and that's going to allow you to feather this out and get the best look. And if you're doing other drywall projects, you really want to have 2 metal compound knives that are flexible, and they're not that expensive to get a couple metal drywall knives. I saw low-cost metal knives starting around $10 each.
What are some top-rated patch companies?
DAP, D-A-P, Red Devil, R-E-D, capital D-E-V-I-L, Saint Gobain, it's S-A-I-N-T, capital G-O-B-A-I-N, and Sheetrock, S-H-E-E-T-R-O-C-K.
What if you have a large area that you want to fix, so it's 10 inches wide? So you're cutting a hole in your ceiling that's 10 inches wide. So
Okay.
It's too big for a patch.
So if it's in between the joists, you're going to get a scrap piece of drywall. Well, first you want to know what is the thickness of your ceiling. For walls, it's generally 1/2-inch drywall. It could be 1/2-inch or 5/8 inch for a ceiling, and 5/8 is pretty common for ceiling drywall. So you get a scrap piece of drywall.
And they have that at the home centers.
Right, yeah, you can buy a small piece. And
so like 2 foot by 2 foot?
Right, yeah, I've seen that. And to attach the drywall to the ceiling without joists to screw into, you can use a 1x4 board or a 1x2 or something similar. For a small opening, you can use one board in the center of the opening. So let's say you take a 1x4 and you cut your opening. You can put that board inside the ceiling, lay it on top of the drywall, and then use a couple drywall screws screwing through your ceiling into that wood so it's held tight. And now you can cut your patch and screw your patch into that piece of wood. And that piece of wood would be wider than the opening. If you have a very large hole, you could put a board on each side of the opening that you've created, a couple inches longer, center the board along the edge for more support, screw into the wood through your ceiling so the wood doesn't move, which could cause a crack.
Right.
And now you can screw your drywall to that wood.
Okay. Do you cut the patch first, or do you cut the drywall in the ceiling first?
I would create my patch first and use that as a template.
So it matches exactly?
Right. So I would use a tape measure and go up
We're
to the
not
hole
just eyeing it.
to decide on the size patch that would be slightly wider on both sides. So you can cut out a square or a rectangular shape, which is going to be easy to cut. And then you're going to use that patch that you've just created and put it up against the area that's damaged on the ceiling. Use a pencil and create a line all along the outside of that patch.
Mm-hmm.
And now you can use a drywall saw to cut out the ceiling so it's going to fit perfectly. And you would do this before you put your piece of wood or pieces of wood into the ceiling that you're going to screw onto.
And maybe mark the patch in the wall.
Yeah.
So you can match it up.
Yeah, I think one good tip is as you're creating is use a pencil and mark one side and mark that same side on the ceiling, and that way your patch is going to go right up in there. And before you use a drywall saw to cut into the ceiling, check for wires, insulation, and other obstructions.
Right.
Use joint compound and run a 3 to 4 inch bed of compound over the seams for paper tape, and you want to force some compound into the seams. Put your tape over the seam and lightly push it into the compound. Then start from the middle of the tape and pull one direction. Then start from the middle again and pull the other direction to embed the tape. You want to cover all 4 seams and butt the tape together. You don't want to overlap the tape. For paper tape, you want to make sure that bed that the tape is going into is about 1/8 of an inch thick. If you have any areas where there's not joint compound, it's going to form an air bubble or an area where the paper will lift up.
Okay.
So you want to make sure there's plenty of compound underneath there and then pull it tight. You only want to leave about 1/16 of an inch of joint compound under it. You're going to use the same steps. You want 3 thin coats, each coat a couple inches wider than the last coat.
Right. Over 3 days.
Right. If you're using pre-mixed joint compound, it takes about 24 hours for it to fully dry, depending on the temperature and the humidity.
Right.
For a large hole, you can use the joists to screw your drywall patch into.
Mm-hmm.
Take a stud finder to mark the joists, and they're usually going to be 16 inches on center.
Meaning what?
Meaning the center of one joist is 16 inches away from the center of the next joist.
Or it could be 24.
Right. In some homes, it will be 24 inches apart. You want to use a drywall saw up to the joist when you're creating your opening, and then use a utility knife to score along the center of the joist. And that way drywall is going to be supported on each side of the joist. Your drywall patch, if your joists are 16 inches on center, is going to be 16 inches wide and then whatever the length is.
Right.
You're going to put your drywall patch against the joists and screw it in. Use 1 3/8 or 1 5/8 inch drywall screws for 5/8 inch drywall.
Mm-hmm.
You can use 1 1/4 drywall screws for 1/2 inch drywall. You're going to space the screws 12 inches apart or closer for a ceiling, and keep the screws 3/8 to 1/2 an inch from the edge of that drywall patch. And recess the head of the screw slightly so that you can cover it with joint compound.
Right.
But don't screw them in too far and tear the paper face, because then it reduces the strength of the screws.
Okay.
Then you're going to follow the same steps to cover the seams with tape and compound.
So you keep saying compound.
Okay.
And if people haven't listened to our other 23 episodes about drywall, you want to explain the difference?
So pre-mixed and lightweight all-purpose joint compound can be used for the embed coat for paper tape and the second and third coats. It hardens as it dries out, and it usually takes overnight. Topping joint compound isn't formulated to embed paper tape. It's just designed for the second and third coat.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other types of joint compound, so check the label for what it should be used for. The easiest compound to use for most homeowners is a pre-mixed all-purpose joint compound. The disadvantage is you usually have to wait overnight for it to dry.
Right.
Dry joint compound that you need to mix with water is a setting type joint compound. It's going to harden through a chemical reaction, and the bag that it comes in is going to be marked for the approximate minutes it takes to harden, like 20, 45, or 90.
Right.
It's great for getting projects done quicker than pre-mixed. USG, the United States Gypsum Company, which was founded in 1902, researched tape and compound combinations, and they say paper tape performs well with pre-mixed or setting-type joint compound for any of the coats that you're putting on. But fiberglass mesh tape works best with a setting-type joint compound for the first coat.
All right.
And then the second or third coat can be either a pre-mixed or a setting type. Some top-rated joint compound comes from Sheetrock. It's SHEETROCK. That's from USG. Durabond, DURA, capital BOND. That's also from USG. Proform, it's PROFORM, and DAP, DAP.
What are some top-rated stud finders?
Zircon, it's ZIRCON. Franklin, FRANKLIN, and Black & Decker, BLACK, Decker, capital DECKER.
Do you have any tips if it's a textured ceiling?
If you're trying to find the joists in the ceiling, I would take a piece of cardboard and cover the ceiling and then use your stud finder on the cardboard rather than dragging your stud finder along the popcorn because you can knock it off.
Right.
Once you repair your ceiling, you can get pre-mixed popcorn ceiling patch. It's a spackling paste with polystyrene chips in it. You would use a paintbrush and dab it onto the ceiling and move it around with the brush so that it matches the texture. And start with just a little at a time until you match it.
Right.
There's also popcorn ceiling texture in a spray can. You would shake the can and then you would use quick shots, moving the can around kind of circular as you're spraying it onto the ceiling. And this is good to practice on a piece of cardboard first till you get a feel for how to use it.
Right. Do you have anything else to add?
If you're sanding joint compound with sandpaper or a sanding sponge, it's going to create a lot of dust.
A lot. So
you can use a dust barrier to isolate the area you're working in. A top-rated dust barrier is from Zipwall, and that's ZIP, capital WALL.
Let's wrap this up.
You can subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review.
You can check out our home improvement videos on our YouTube channel, Fix It Home Improvement.
And you can subscribe to that as well.
You can download our ebooks, Home Improvement Solutions, What Every Homeowner Should Know, books 1 through 15 on Amazon.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star rating and review.
You can email us at fixitpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow Cindy on Twitter at FixItCohost. And you can follow us on Instagram, Fix It Home Improvement.
Thank you for listening.
Talk to you next week.